Looking forward to learn from their experience. First of all, it's a pleasure to be with such distinguished leaders in this conference, participants and hosts. And for me, this day has been a day that I'm going to remember. Lots of lessons, and I wish that I have the time to talk. But I'd rather listen to our distinguished panels, and then at the end, I would capture a few minutes. Before going ahead with that, I think the previous sessions have already gave us foundation, diagnostic and descriptive understanding of where we are. I think, too, that many share with me their unhappiness about where we are. I think this great world, with these great people, deserve better. The main message is that we are in a crisis of democracy, in addition to many other crises that we see on CNN every day. The second message, that the democracy is in a process of evolution. We didn't hear the word revolution. Nobody would like to destruct the existing system, but rather we would like to improve and enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of the existing system. The next point, that our life and democracy still work in progress. There is unfinished business here that we need and we have responsibility to work on, and we must work on it. Not in a conferencing mode, but in a unity mode, and try with all the triggers that came today to put it into action and reality. Next, that existing models of democracy fail, and that the previous approaches, which were born, at least looking at the past 70 years since Second World War, are not suitable for the 21st century. Democracy 21 is different from democracy 20. The fifth point, that we still believe in democracy. The principles of democracy still valid. The great sessions are about frameworking the issues. I don't think we are in a disagreement about the principles, but there are many other parameters that are added. Unfortunately, models that were developed decades ago, need to be enhanced and improved. It's like an old building. Either you need to sort of upgrade it, facelift it, or to demolish it and build a new one. The sixth point, that we have not been successful recently in maintaining or building democracies. The indicators that are shown, and I think we have many case studies from this region, from our country and others around us, that will be written in the history, not like the history of art, the history of democracy, about what we have done to basically destroy the dream of democracy in our lands. Also, we have not been successful in managing the transition to democracy or to attaining democracy. Having said that, we were all invited up front with 3 questions, and we were as well asked, in addition to the diagnostic and descriptive view that was basically put to us so far, to try to put our inputs to the prescriptive view or the normative view of what democracy 21 should be. And in addition, instead of repeating what has been said, allow me on an SMS format, and I know every one of you has a mobile, I'm going to tell you what I haven't heard or what I didn't hear strongly and explicitly. The first point, and I'm very adamant about it, I would like to hear from you. Can democracy work with illiteracy? We in our country, we have 30% illiteracy. In this part of the world, the Arab world, we have 40% illiteracy. In Africa, the same. Is the model of democracy that has been developed or that we're going to develop uniformly applicable in countries which has such percentages of illiteracy? SMS number one. Number two, poverty. We have here 40% poverty, same in the region. We have in Upper Egypt, in a governorate called Asyut, 69% illiteracy. In governorate called Sohag, 58% illiteracy. The whole of Upper Egypt, 1 out of 2 is poor and severely poor. Can democracy that we talk about here in the Library of Alexandria work? Next, education. This great country that got the very distinguished people that you see from Egypt, that I'm very proud to know them and to be friends with them and to be their colleagues, the rank of Egypt today is 141 out of 144 countries in the quality of education in the world. Dropped in 30 years from the 30th and 40th of the country to that rank. By the way, Dr. Hussam led the competitiveness report that basically illuminate the country about this. He's with us here. It's unheard of that we are talking about a great nation or a great democracy when we have that fall in education and that education and knowledge divides. Next, I heard messages implicitly talked about information. I'm very biased. I was born in the information paradigm. I don't believe there is any democracy without the information. Let me give you a couple of examples. Do you know how much is the public debt of Egypt today? Just not to let you think, it's 2.2 trillion Egyptian pounds. Do you know how much was it in 1996? 126 billion. Do you know how much was it before the revolution? It was 1 trillion. The last 5 years exceeded 1 trillion. The last year, 350 billion. What are the checks and balances? And who spends this money? And who makes decision about this money? This is not our money. This is our kids and the future generation money. In the absence of this info, we are talking in a totally different paradigm. In the presence of this info, next to the poverty, next to the education, you can see the reality, the cost, the benefit, the priorities, the changes. Next, democracy and media. When the theory of democracy was, which is being taught as 101 in most schools of the world was taught, there were no TV. With the power of media, you're talking TV, social media, press, etc. Again, Democracy 21 is going to be different. Next to this, and I differentiate it explicitly, is technology. And by technology, I mean all what brings the infrastructure to the new world. Next point, which is the 7th point, is building democracy. I believe, and I'm biased, and I'm strongly biased, that democracy is built. It doesn't come from the sky with rain, or it doesn't, and we need to build it. Like building this beautiful Library of Alexandria. There was an architect, there was a concept, a vision, an architect, competition, and then building the building. That's a project, and then building an institution, and then building human resources, and then building. And we cannot talk about democracy in developing world, unstructured, semi-structured, poor, all of that, without having the nation come forcefully, not the private money, forcefully to build a right party, a left party, a middle party, build it. Not as a slogan, but with the full resources, with the human capacity, so that across time we build people who can run democracy. Managing implementation, and I'll be looking forward to hear, and then the contextual reality and transition. One point about contextual reality is, what are we talking about today in terms of our population? Today we are 90 million, close to 100 million. The good news, or maybe the bad news for democracy, that by year 2050, we will be, this country, exceeding 200 million. We will be more than double. Our target was just to be double, but unfortunately went out of control. Can you tell me how are you gonna manage democracy for 200 million in 35 years? We cannot manage it today with 20% participation in the last election. Next to this, and I loved the discussion of the distinguished panel that my friend and colleague ran it, Mr. Hans, and the points of Dr. Ismail and Dr. Alexander. In the 21st century, I think it's like I think your experience now of booking your airline tickets. In the old days, people like me, they used to go to travel agents or representative of the travel to book a flight. Now you bypass this and you book it via Expedia or booking.com or something like this. I don't know if presidents do that. We are the people of the world, we do that. Do you think that Democracy 21 will give, with the power of the internet and the power of the mobile and the power of the iPad, will give the opportunity for citizens to vote directly on issues? So basically, we are voting on issues rather than on people. It's called, in the theory and the methodology, issue-based decision support systems and issue-based policy making. Okay? I don't want to run a commercial, but in 1988, okay, I had the privilege to get the first prize award on this particular thing, which I would like Dr. Ismail to give me a session on that next time. On issues, as a matter of fact, Latvia worked on it, and the people are voting straightforward into the issues. So you don't need really a representative who would do a good job or a bad job. You go straight to have people voting on it. The last but not least, which is going to be a challenge, but it's very important in the paradigm as well, that in a parallel to the Arab Spring, there is a Western Spring that's happening in the Silicon Valley and the like. Knowledge and science have been sort of reinvented and will be reinvented in the next 5 years. It's totally the contrary of what's happening. Okay? Not what's happening on the ground. There, the convergence of ICT, biology, science, physics, etc., are basically writing a new code, not only using the DNA, with the business, and new industries, a new business, a new. At the very end, the democratization of these innovations and what is happening and the impact is going to either widening the gap or shortening the gap. It could have more participatory world or less. What's the impact of that on the world? Today, we have the golden opportunity to listen and hear from 4 distinguished presidents from the real world, from the practice. They were there in the process and the transition from dictatorship to democracy, from war to peace, from chaos to building a state. Is it a perfect transition, Your Excellencies? What is it? What were the realities? What were the challenges? What were the success? And allow me, what are the failures or the unfinished business that you would have liked to see? We are here to listen to you, to learn from you, and allow me after that as well to do something that I would like to, Your Kindness and their Excellencies have all agreed to have their talk about 10 minutes that will open discussion so that we can get fully engaged with every one of you so that you can ask and learn and take something back. Allow me, with no further introduction, to invite His Excellency President Boris Tadjik. Please.
Thank you, Chairman. We're coming from the Eastern Europe. We are coming from Southeast Europe. We have 2 parts of Southeast Europe. This is the Western Balkans and the Eastern Balkans. I'm coming from former Yugoslavia. I was president of Serbia, the largest country from former Yugoslavia. And difference between my country, my former country, and the current country, and countries of other presidents from that region, is that we were involved in the war, a horrible war with many human victims, and civil war, religious war, and finally war against NATO. This is a very painful, terrible, and interesting experience. But I would like to share that experience with you, especially in the context of democracy and building democracy. Democracy is evolution that we have to build. This is very important. And without participation of human beings, politicians, NGOs, intellectuals, faculty, we cannot create stable society. Former Yugoslavia had a sophisticated dictatorship. That was under Tito's period. Tito was a communist leader, but a little bit different than other leaders of communism under Soviet bloc system. We've been capable to travel abroad freely without visas. In the former Yugoslavia, we listened music from the Western countries, rock and roll, and that was free access for us to listen that kind of music and to absorb that kind of culture. We traveled a lot on the West, and we had in the former Yugoslavia some model of free market, which was beginning of the modern economy. Frankly speaking, even though I was against Tito as a very young student, he has been allowing to the entrepreneurials to develop their own businesses, not totally, but in some, in accordance with some rules. And we had a kind of economic developing of Yugoslav economies in that time. Living standard was increasing every year. And that is the main reason why that system was pretty stable. After Tito, the leader of my country was Slobodan Milošević. Maybe you heard about Slobodan Milošević. And he was leading Serbia he was a typical communist leader. Many of you are thinking that he was a nationalist. He wasn't nationalist. He was a technocrat and communist, but he has been using a national issue as a manipulation issue in his fighting against domestic political forces in Serbia. But he has been creating coalition with the pure nationalists, horrible nationalists. That is exactly how he has been showing his political philosophy, and the outcome of that was that we were economically totally destroyed with very little capacities in democratic fields, lack of institutions, and freedom of media. We weren't able even to talk about that. That was our situation until 2000, October 2000, when we had a so-called democratic revolution without human victims. And we changed the political system in that time. October the 5th was a great date in our recent history, but the problem is coming from the nature of human beings. People are expecting very fast and so much changes overnight, and the politicians are not always capable to deliver their promises. And in that context, if you're asking ordinary people in Serbia about democracy, they are not very much focused on that issue, but on issue of living standard right now. And this is a normal, but that can be also a problem, because without participation of ordinary people on elections, without the common efforts on protecting democracy, democratic institutions, we cannot build democracy, even though democracy is evolution. But sometimes that evolution can be very slow, and that can be a problem. I was president of Serbia from 2004 until 2012. I had 2 terms as a president. Before that, I was a minister of telecommunication and minister of defense after democratic changes. I started kind of reforms in telecommunication, new technology sector, and also in defense sector, bringing our defense system closer to the NATO standards and putting the general staff under civilian control of Ministry of Defense. First time in our history. That was very tough. Now you know what I'm talking about, but that was very new in our political experience, but also that was full by risks in that time. And that is how we are building democracy. Today, which is a controversial fact of every post-communist country, we have old political forces on the power. Former Communist Party and the nationalists, former nationalists. People that has been leading Serbia during the Milosevic period from the position of vice presidents of the government, ministers, spokespersons of their parties. But they totally changed the magnitude of their policy. They changed strategical orientation. During my 2 terms, I was trying to create national consensus on strategical orientation towards European Union, towards building democracy, and we did it. But because of that, I lost elections. They became popular, and I lost elections. I lost my 3rd elections for president, and now they're leading country. The problem is coming from the fact that if politicians are changing their strategical orientation verbally, it doesn't mean that they are changing their system of the values. In that respect, today we don't have a freedom of media in Serbia anymore. And we have the media totally under control of the ruling parties, and this is one of the most important and difficult problems for democracy in Serbia today. At the same time, European Union Commission is right now opening chapters with the European Union. We are right now negotiating with the European Union, and which is very important, that I'm supporting very much, because without opening chapters, you cannot create reforms. Without creating reforms, you cannot really create democratic society. Without creating democratic society, we cannot create sustainable economic development. But at the same time, we have many, many controversial moments within democracy in Serbia. We don't have a freedom of media anymore. We have insulting and humiliation of the journalists. We have attacking on opposition today. In Serbia, situation is very difficult. And that is why I was coming back in politics 2 years after my second term. I was invited by my fellows, my party fellows, to come back in politics again, and right now I'm starting my work on establishing democracy in Serbia once again. And if we are talking about democracy in the post-communist countries in the Southeast Europe, this is one of the experiences that I would like to share with you. First time, as I understand, my beginning in politics was 1979. I was a student of psychology. In that time, I signed a petition against the communist law, which was focused on freedom of thoughts and freedom of medias. And now I'm, again, after many, many decades, beginning my political work on establishing democracy in the same field. This is very strange. This is very strange, and this is how democracy is very vulnerable in our region. Fortunately, some countries in our region are already member states of European Union. This is Bulgaria, and this is Romania. We have two presidents, Stoyanov and Constantinescu, from the countries that are already member states. My country is negotiating. I brought my country towards candidate status. Now we are starting to negotiate. Albania is not negotiating now, but I'm expecting Albania is going to start to negotiate chapters. President Maidan is going to explain that. But that means that Croatia is already in the European Union, Slovenia also, Bosnia and Herzegovina is far from European Union, Montenegro is negotiating already, and this is situation in the Western Balkans. The problem is because we are not all together right now in European Union. There are many, many differences. That region is very vulnerable in terms of economic development, in terms of building infrastructure, in terms of respecting rule of law, in terms of building democratic institutions, in terms of sustainable economy. During the economic crisis, we've been very affected, and we dropped from 4, 6, 7% of growth to -3, -4, Croatia -7. That was very painful. After that, we recovered ourselves, and now this year we have again growth in Serbian economy, but very little growth. Without economic growth, there is no democracy, and those issues are connected to each other. Chicken egg.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. His Excellency President Emil Constantiu.
Thank you, Chairman. We are here together, four heads of state that have something in common. We have been the first democratically elected presidents of our countries after half century of communist dictatorship. So you now have in front of you four persons that were obliged during difficult times in the history of our nations to take decision on behalf of their people and to respond for them before their contemporaries and before the generation to come. We do not claim to have answers for 21st century democracy, especially related to the complicated development that followed the Arab Springs. History does not repeat itself. The ones repeating the negative consequences of some historical phenomena if do not understand correctly what they have in common and what is different about social political phenomena in different periods and places that seem similar at first glance. What do the countries that manage to come out from dictatorship have in common? Firstly, the fact that they have to face conflicts often coming from centuries the dictatorship regime had frozen without solving them. It is about religious, national, ethnic, social, cultural, ideological conflicts. We, in the Balkans, have confronted with all this in 1989 and 1990, when during 2 years, all communist dictatorships, which seemed eternal, suddenly collapsed. These potential conflicts primarily came from our long history, because, as Churchill said, the Balkans produce more history than they can consume. In my trips in Balkans, because I'm geologist, and I was from geological purpose in all Balkans country during communist regime. And I seen on the walls of schools, university, academies, museums of each country a map of a greater country, greater Greece, greater Turkey, greater Bulgaria, greater Serbia, greater Albania, greater Romania, greater Hungary. Each of these maps includes other neighboring countries or part of them. This is the first problem. These maps are not only on the walls or in the books, but also in the mind of the people, brought up in the spirit of past glory. The first temptation after the fall of the Soviet Empire was redrawing the borders between the countries through war or through calling the great power, what happened in history before. The second problem was the relation between the majority and the national and ethnic minorities in each country. In Romania, the Hungarian minority, in Bulgaria, the Turkish minority, in Serbia, Albanian minorities. This relation is more difficult to be managed when accompanied by dispute inside Christians between Orthodox, Catholics, Protestant, or between Christian and Muslims, even if these believers are part of the common nationality or ethnicity. Then, for me, the main problem in Romania was the relation between Romanian majority and Hungarian minority. Because as a century was a bloody conflict. All century was marked by bloody conflict between Romanian and Hungarians. And after the fall of communist regime, in few months, in the center of Transylvania, it's a big town, where population is exactly half Hungarian, half Romanian, was a conflict becoming a bloody conflict, and provoked by secret services, former communist secret services from Romania and from Hungary, because it was very important because it was destroyed by the popular revolt. And now it's very important for secret services to have a reason to be reinstalled. In this moment was the action of intellectuals. Because what happened in Romania was before what happened in the former Yugoslavia. It was the first moment of this kind of conflicts. And in this moment, intellectual elite said no to conflicts. In that moment, I was the president of university. I'm very proud. I was, after 50 years, I was elected the first rector, president elected by professors and students, by Senate, but not imposed by dictator, fascist dictator, royal dictator, or communist dictatorship. And artists, we was Budapest, and together, intellectual of Hungary, we said no to conflict, an idea to work together. And before my presidency, President Gönc, and is a moment of the memory of President Gönc. He died. He died 1 month ago. Was a big personality. He was elected president because he was the president of Writers' Union of Hungarians. He was condemned of death penalty after Hungarian Revolution 1956. Is a great personality. He invited me when I was rector in Budapest, and I proposed him cultural reconciliation. And President Arpad Gönc said, what is cultural reconciliation? I proposed cultural reconciliation is not deny our past, because it's a bloody past, tragical past. Assume the past and work together for our future. And this was happened because when I was elected president, all Hungarians, this is 7% in Romania, all Hungarians vote for me. It was very curiously in this moment. But just in first months after election, we give the Hungarian minority all rights. Over is the highest level in Europe. The right to use Hungarian language in school, in school, including universities. It's a single case in Europe. In justice, in administration, and having minister in government to have a guarantee of the power. And in this moment, no conflict, but also we have common seance of government, of Romanian government and Hungarian government in Bucharest or in Budapest. And we coming together in European Union. Firstly Hungary, but after Romania. Was the same as the President Stoyanov, I can send, is one of the best friend of mine. Also, was during history was a wars between Bulgarian and Romanian. In first Bulgarians and Romanians, yes, was a wars. In the First World War, in Second World War, we have a share Dobroja, the same was the Bulgarian Dobroja, Romanian Dobroja, and we inaugurate a tandem. And during our presidency, common presidency, the same period, in all moments we work together. We call in difficult moment, I called Stoyanov, Stoyanov called me, and this was our advantage in integration European Union, because we continue to keep today this tandem Romanian, Bulgarian team. Secondly, the national or ethnic conflicts were accompanied after the collapse of the dictatorship by social conflict. This firstly began from the difficulty of managing freedom, seen by most through its advantages: freedom of movement, of opinion, freedom of partnership, but not through its risk, competition, or through losing some advantages that the communist dictatorship ensured. For example, the right to work, because during communist regime, all people work, including in prisons, including in the company, but all people work, even if this was underpaid. Another difficulty was the introduction and particularly the function of democratic institutions in absence of democratic consciousness, whose formation takes time. In Eastern Europe, the difference between the countries that had democratic institutions before communist dictatorship, especially between the First and Second World War, Czechia, Slovakia, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, was a country having democratic institutions. And the difference between these countries and the countries that went directly from Tsarist absolutism to Soviet one, Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, as this difference was visible. And finally, the biggest difficulty was the transition from the collectivist spirit imposed by the single party to all people, characteristic to communist dictatorship, and the communitarian spirit characteristic to Western European democracies based on the free association of citizens. As many times before in history, it was seen that it is easier to achieve solidarity against an external and internal common enemy than solidarity around the common goal. From the experience gained in the past 26 years, I can say that the project of the intellectual elites in Eastern Europe countries of European integration adopted by our people that were capable to assume the hard social cost led to overcoming potential conflict between states and those within them. We, the first democratically elected president in Eastern Europe after half century of criminal communist dictatorship, during which the communist dictatorship deprived of freedom, tortured, and killed tens of millions of their own people, have strived to transform the pedagogy of suffering into pedagogy of reconciliation. Whether we succeeded or not, only history will judge.
Thank you very much. His Excellency President Midani.
Thank you, Tom. Well, 25 years ago, in our countries, we had this communist regime. And now, some of our countries are members of European Union, are ready to enter to this union. And I believe this period of 25 years is rather short. Don't consider this a long period comparatively to the life of a country and the changes in one country. Why this process was so short in time? Because all countries have been a part of Europe, and these societies have been in contact through different links and interactions. But to understand what was happening in our countries, we have to go back to the end of the Second War. Yalta, the Conference of Yalta, has divided Europe in two political blocks and ideological blocks. This was the area of the Steel Curtain and the area of the Cold War. The division of Europe, ideological division, political division, was also economic one. And in one side, it was a capitalist system. On the other side, we have had this so-called socialist economic system. In eastern part, we have the creation of Soviet bloc, the state socialism, the economic model of the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, while in western part, we have had a kind of American invasion through a Marshall Plan, a process of building the European community. In the first group of the countries where our countries of Southeastern Europe are a part, main characteristics were political hierarchy in economic decisions or central planning, nationalization of all private assets, primacy and unity of the state, the Communist Party as a single party, and a kind of bureau of planning. It was also a massive industrialization, a vertical integration, and a concentration of industrial structures, and particularly a dominance of the Soviet Union and economic specialization in the East in the frame of so-called socialist international division of labor. In fact, the fall of Berlin Wall in November '89 marked the beginning of the end of the post-World War II. Symbolically, it marked for us also the beginning of a process of radical transformation. And in this transformation, 15 former Soviet republics, plus Mongolia, and all other countries of Southeastern Europe have participated in this process of transition. If we consider this process of transition, I believe we have to emphasize different aspects. It's political and institutional transition, economic transition, diplomatic transition, the identity transition, and social cultural transition. Regarding Albania, if we consider the first transition, political transition and institutional one, well, we've had a constitution before the beginning of this transition. It was a communist constitution where it was permitted only one party, the Communist Party, to dominate all the aspects of the life in Albania. And the main step was a kind of, we have considered a package, constitutional package, not an entire constitution, to help the process of political institutional transition. Of course, if we consider this binomial between state and society, the state was, liberal, and society was more oppressed, but still was a society without a kind of conflicts based on the ethnicity or religion. And in the constitution, in this constitutional package, what was emphasized was to have secular state again and a liberal society where all the religions have been permitted. Particularly in Albania, where we have three main groups. We have Muslims, more than half part of population belongs to Muslim group. And we have also two other groups are Christians, Orthodox, and Catholics. And based on this constitutional package, they have had the same rights, and the society was a liberal society. And of course, now we're trying to work more for building a shared society, a better shared society. Of course, there are different models, and I don't believe that a religious state and a religious society, if they are together, interfere to produce, I believe, it's not possible to produce the real democracy, because they can create problems to other religions. But this was the first aspect of our political transition and institutional transition. Of course, we've had some problems. Not all time, all this period, the legal power was exerted by the constitutional institutions, executive power, legislative power, or judicial power, but it was substituted in different forms by other structures, such as political parties or their structures and their leaders. Still, we have this problem with these parties. Some leaders there, when they are taking the power, they're trying again to command, not to respect all the democratic criteria. The other, the cases is when the security forces, police, Republican Guard, intelligence services, and armed forces, in some cases they have substituted the constitutional structures. Particularly, this was happening at 97, when we have had this fall of pyramidal schemes, and at the time, the president that I have substituted resigned after 3 or 4 months being elected, because there was a kind of crisis where he has used these structures against the constitutional rules. And also some other cases when we have had these external factors or interference between political leadership and financial and economic groups, including some media operators. And what I can say regarding this kind of political institution transition, also today in Balkans we have this problem, this interference between politics and the business and economic groups, so what we call oligarchs. So we have a kind of interference which is not a positive. It's creating a kind of frustration for normal political, institutional, and economic development. The other aspect of transition in all our countries, including Albania, it was a transition from centrally planned socialist economy to a free market system. Of course, also this kind of transition was difficult, in many cases more difficult than political transition. But, today we feel that while the system is working, and the process of European integration and the criteria that have helped us in this process of realizing positively this economic transition. The other transition is so-called, what I call diplomatic transition, or let's call this integration into Western dominating international system, including there also the military cooperation. And if we consider this process, we have jumped from this Warsaw Pact to NATO, where Albania is a member of NATO today, but also a member in many international structures, including International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the organization, the Trade, World Trade Organization, etc. So it's a transfer to new international structures, which has helped the process of transition of Albania. The other element that was not so problematic in the case of Albania, but it was in some cases was quite problematic, it was the identity transition. So in the case of Albania, well, it was a kind of transition, let's call it like that, from party identity to Albanian citizenship, and later to go to European citizenship. For other countries, like, yes, I'll finish. After 2 minutes, it's okay. And regarding this identity transition, for new republics in Soviet Union, we have had this big change because we have had the Soviet citizens to go to Ukrainian citizens or to other citizens. And this process was a difficult process because in this process, of course, the different conflicts that I've mentioned by President Constantinescu have taken place. The other transition was a social cultural transition, where also education, science, and research is included. And I believe that if we finish the process of accession to European Union, we'll consider, at least in the case of Albania, consider the phase, the final phase of Albanian transition will be considered finished. So we consider this transition finished with the accession to European Union. What I like to mention at the end is that, well, what I've seen, not only in Albania, but also in other countries, because it was mentioned in one of the panels, the elections are not quite enough. If we consider what are the necessary and sufficient conditions for a democracy, we need these elections, and of course free and fair elections, but we need also many elements, social, cultural elements, and other elements that I've mentioned in all these transitions to have positive results. Otherwise, if we think that through these elections we can resolve democratic problems, it's not possible. And my experience as being in a mission in Palestine with President Carter and Carl Bildt and Anna Palacio, it was an international mission who have been co-leaders in this mission, the experience was a negative one. So everything was quite correct regarding the elections, organization and participation, but at the end, well, Hamas has won because, well, they have administrated different units like kindergarten, hospitals, different camps, so using money, and well, the result was not positive. So it doesn't mean that through the elections, participation also in the elections, and if we consider free and fair elections, well, the result will be a democratic one, because the different influences could have more negative results than the positive organization of the elections. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Mr. His Excellency President Stoyanov.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Allow me first of all to thank Dr. Ismail Sarageldin and his enthusiastic team from Bibliotheca Alexandrina for organizing this wonderful event. Thank you very much. My special thanks to Nizami Genjavi International Center for its support and for its activity during the last 3 years. Thank you very much. So, Chairman, you raised a lot of questions related to the core of democracy, and we can discuss on that, and I'm not sure that we're going to find the proper answer for that, because it is more difficult to speak about democracy and to explain democracy now than to speak or explain democracy even before the Second World War and after the Second World War. Why? So I remember vividly the euphoria just after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And this absolutely unexpected and peaceful transition led us to believe that the unification of the two Europes would be as easy as the fall of the wall. But now we have to confess that we continue to face a lot of difficulties and challenges. So last year we celebrated 25th year of the lifting of the Iron Curtain. And we have had a lot of discussions, not only in Bulgaria, in Eastern Europe at all. And the opinions were very different, even contradictory. Some Eastern European citizens call this time glorious time and changes, historical changes. Because the greater number of the former socialist countries joined the European Union, and now we same values with the developed countries in Western Europe. But on the other hand, there are citizens in Eastern Europe who think that the changes did not bring the expected economic prosperity and justice for all. And this is the biggest question in Eastern Europe. The main argument is that during communism, the Eastern Europeans had a more secure and more predictable life, without extremely rich oligarchs, without corruption and social inequality. These phenomena do exist, and we have to fight against them every day, but the picture of post-communist transition is much broader and by all means not so pessimistic. Let me start with the issues that commonly provoke the dissatisfaction of the Eastern European citizens. Liberal democracy and the free market economy were regarded as the only attractive option by the vast majority of our people during the communist regime. Today, the economic reforms leading to them are no longer met with the same enthusiasm. Moreover, they are being questioned by a part of our public, and I believe that the key words that explain that are unfair transition and corruption. Apart from its well-known negative impact on the individual, the public, and the state, corruption erodes the very foundation of our fragile democracy. If the new political elites in Eastern Europe fail to cope with this problem, some people may raise doubts about the very sense of our democracy. Public opinion polls show that it is not the poor or the losers in the reform process, but those who believe their country is corrupt, that are the most frequent champions of non-democratic options. Corruption and unfair transition are the two main reasons for the post-communist nostalgia among some people in the former communist countries. Strangely enough, you can find the so-called post-communist nostalgia even in the former GDR, which is really strangely enough with other countries which used to belong to the Soviet system in the past. The phenomenon explains the recently born politics of the so-called firm hand or the strong man, which is very popular, frankly speaking, not only in Eastern Europe. In other words, corruption and unfair transition break people's faith in the advantages of democratic government. Democracy in the post-communist societies will remain fragile unless it is bolstered by institutional and legislative mechanisms, an efficient judiciary, state administration and police, high standard of living, which is very important because our people prefer to have democracy of prosperity and not democracy of poverty, high standard of living and a responsible civil society. This cannot be fulfilled without restoring the authority of the state. The idea that democracy and the strong state are not interrelated is totally wrong. And I fully share the expression of one of the most famous philosophers of our time, Karl Popper, that we need freedom to overcome the abuse of the state power. But at the same time, we also need the state to overcome the abuse of freedom. This problem cannot be solved only through good legislation. We need strong state institutions to implement it, and most importantly, a good will on every citizen's part. We need the so-called spirit of legislation, in our countries. Despite the issues I have outlined and which I believe need to be addressed, I am convinced that the fall of communism and the transition to democracy and free market economy are one of the most remarkable achievements, not only for the citizens of former communist countries, but also for the entire European continent. According to sociological studies in my country, a significant part of the population is unhappy with some of the problems of the transition. However, the same sources show that when people are asked if they would agree to live again in a similar system like before 1989, the majority categorically says no, because today Bulgarians cannot imagine being deprived of the basic rights to express their opinions freely, to vote freely, to travel freely abroad, or to choose what business they would like to start up. Despite the fact that we continue to have struggling pensioners and arrogant oligarchs, the post-communist transition process shouldn't be seen as a failure. And this is very important, we said. Since the start of transition, the post-communist countries have developed rapidly. After the changes, all post-communist countries started reforms to build free market economy, balance budgets, cut inflation, and create competition, privatize state enterprises, etc. So, just a few facts. The private firms in Eastern Europe are producing now 70% of the production. Services increased from 36 to 58% of output on average. The post-communist states have reoriented towards the markets of Europe. By 2012, which means 3 years ago, exports to the European Union made up 68% of the total in the median East European country, and 47% in the median former Soviet republics, which is a remarkable achievement. The increase in consumption was also dramatic. In the median post-communist country, household final consumption per capita grew by 53% between 1990 and 2011. More and more post-communist citizens were buying cars. I would like to say here that we had to wait more than 10 years in Bulgaria and maybe more than 15 years in the former Soviet Union to buy a car. And we had to wait more than 8 years in Bulgaria and more than 13 years in Poland to buy a small apartment, a small flat. And now between 1993 and 2011, the average among the post-communist states went from 1 car for every 10 people to 1 car for every 4, almost as high as in Israel, for example. Even in Lithuania and Poland, there are now more cars per person than in UK. When it comes to the new technologies, internet users, averaging 54% of the population, are more widespread in the post-communist world today than in any region in the world except Western Europe and United States. Communist citizens were really allowed to travel, very rarely allowed to travel abroad, but in 2012, residents of these countries made almost 170 million international tourist trips. Living space rose by 99% in the Czech Republic, 78% in Bulgaria, and 39% in Russia. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear Chairman, of course we continue to face a lot of problems, a lot of challenges. Unemployment remains relatively high, standard of living relatively low, but in comparison with the most developed countries in the world, our people in Bulgaria complain every day. We're maybe among the poorest countries. But in the European Union, in comparison with countries like France, Britain, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, which is okay under 45 years of communism, because of that, our citizens, according to the polls, express significantly less trust in government and greater dissatisfaction with their jobs, living standards, education, and healthcare systems. But one thing is sure, despite of the difficulties, we're on the right track. Market reforms and fight against corruption were not failures, although they remain incomplete. We have to say that. And the post-communist transition is also not a failure. It reveals the superiority of liberal democracy and free market economy, and development of Eastern Europe prove it. So thank you very much for your attention. I wanted to finish more optimistically.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. We have done a great contribution. Allow me to open the floor now for a few questions. Dr. Ismail Sirajuddin, Dr. Farid Al-Alaqi, and then the gentleman on the back. Go ahead, Doctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have really three observations very quickly. One, to something you said, which is that you can replace representative democracy by direct vote through modern technology. It really is not so. The reason we need representative democracy is not just because people had to travel and stay in a certain place and meet. It's because A, they discuss with each other, and B, they have the time to invest and the staff to review major complex legislation which a modern state requires. You cannot replace that by a simple referendum system, which you could do otherwise. So we are stuck with that part. The second part that is related to this form of democratic decision-making is what is the function of the representative? And I, as a great classicist, believe in the statement of Edmund Burke, major Irish political figure of the 18th century who supported the American Revolution but not the French Revolution. And he said to his constituents, your representative owes you not only his hard work, his industry, but his judgment. And he betrays instead of serving you if he sacrifices it to your opinion. Because public opinion on the streets, as we know, is very volatile, affected by media, and not by substantive study of the issues at hand. So we need to be able to get a process that gets this kind of person into the decision. The second point that is very important is also that the nature of the political system is not necessarily tied to the economic system. I mean, we like to think of saying that market economy and democracy go together. But as was mentioned earlier, capitalism is a great system, but it also works with plutocracy in the United States. It works with state capitalism in China. It works with totalitarian regimes like Mr. Pinochet in Chile, and it works with social democracy in Sweden. So you can really disengage a large part of that and still have the functioning market side. The aberrations, and that's where I think these gentlemen deserve to perhaps someone from the panel should address this. As you moved from the totalitarian system to the post-communist system, the emergence of the oligarchs and the organized crime families, looking back on your experience, could it have been avoided? Or were the apparatchiks necessarily those who would benefit from the privatization of government assets and the liberalization of the economy? I mean, just looking back at your experience, would you be able to avoid that in order to have a more orderly Western-style system?
Okay. Contrary to what I wanted to do to take the questions, I think Dr. Ismail mentioned three things. Please go ahead.
My answer on the third question is that the influence of oligarchs is critical and very dangerous in our societies, in all our societies. In that respect, the foundation of democracy is in danger. Mr. Berger has been mentioning few foundations of democracy, which is a stable state has to have independent judiciary. Second, this is freedom of media. And the third, this is a civil society and legitimate democratic institutions. Oligarchs are owners of medias. Second, they have, in the second stage, huge influence on civil society because they have money. They can manipulate them. Third, they have a possibility to make influence on members of the parliament because members of the parliament are in accordance with the European Union standards owners of the mandate. They are not obliged to follow what is the approach of their own parties. They can do what they want in the parliament. In that respect, I'm trying to bring chapeau noir in this room right now. And the standards of democracy can be converted into the weapon and instrument against democracy. In societies that are in transition process. And this is very important to share with you. And whoever is in favor of democracy, I'm fully supporting him. But be careful with democratic standards can be converted overnight.
Any other comments?
Yep. Well, I believe the question was the right one. And based on my experience, it was quite difficult. It was quite difficult because also we didn't have the right legislation, we didn't have the right structures to fight corruption, also this kind of accumulation of economic power. And I can say that also it's linked to the serious difficulties which we have been observed in this kind of passage from centrally planned socialist economy to capitalist economy or to free market economy. And in this process, well, we have applied two approaches, two alternatives. One was the shock therapy, which was at the beginning in the case of Albania. In Poland, it was for all the period. And in the second phase, we have applied this kind of gradual, incremental transition. And through this kind of two technologies, we have tried to not to eliminate, but to reduce this kind of accumulation of economic power.
Thank you. Please.
Speaking about the so-called oligarchs, I mentioned already this phenomenon in my speech very shortly. Allow me to say a few words about that. Thinking about that, I think that the lifting of the Iron Curtain was possible not only because of the glorious efforts of people like Lech Walesa or Václav Havel, but because the high-ranking, the top communist nomenclature in Moscow during that time agreed with that. I think that the main characteristic of the top KGB and communist nomenclature during the last years before the fall of the communism was the cynicism. They didn't believe no more in Stalin, in Lenin, in Marx, in the so-called proletarian brotherhood. They were thinking how to transfer their asset into the Western countries. And just after the changes, these people, the high-ranking nomenclature people, they're much more prepared than all of us to build the so-called capitalism. And they became not only the builders of the Eastern European capitalism, let me say they became the masons of the Eastern European capitalism. And because of that, on the very foundation of Eastern European and Russian capitalism, lays this cynicism. Because of that, the Eastern European capitalism is not so similar with the capitalism in Sweden, Norway, things like that. Thank you very much.
What you can say now after 26 years after the fall of communist dictatorship in Eastern Europe? It is a path. Democracy is a path from dictatorship to democracy. This path is long, difficult, and full of hazard, and can never know if it is not reversible. In the long run, democracy is born, grows, weakens, or dies in the conscience of each person that chooses to be a free citizen or to surrender his freedom and human dignity to a dictator. For me, democracy is a problem of dignity and the self-respect of each person.
Thank you very much. On the first note of Dr. Ismail, my message was that technology and information will support and enable rather than would replace the classics of ICT has been always debating the replacement of a decision maker, the replacement of the management, the replacement. What I'm saying here is basically that revisiting this again, we're not going to replace representatives, we're not going to replace policymakers, but there are implications in Democracy 21 that technology will push us to think about. And we need to rethink. And for sure it will have implications. It's coming, it's there in the information accessibility, in the, I'm saying in the voting thing, in the support for structuring the issues. The representative is no longer free to do whatever he used to do in the 50s or 60s. Okay. Exactly, Dr. Adel. Dr. Farida, تفضلي.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, my friends of Nizami Ganjavi board. Happy to see you here, all of you. 26 years since you started your march towards democracy. And what I'm hearing from you who have not yet started the march in Libya, we started it 2 years and then we are in the big mess that you all know about. The problem that concerns us now, I'm a bit confused also. Here we are in a roller coaster. On one hand, listening to all of you in the past and today, yes, indeed, the road to democracy is very long. You are at least happy that you are celebrating that you are free from the dictatorship. But when you talk about oligarchy, President Peter, or when you, Boris, are talking about also the same thing and the corruption, that scares me again. Because now your countries, many merchants, many oligarchs in your countries are exporting arms to our country to kill our people. And my dilemma is the Western democracies who have been always talking about principles and values, can you please let me know why they have been supporting dictators in our region? The West has supported many of the dictators. I want to talk about Gaddafi, the business, the money, the oil. So how we are going to really be honest enough to resolve this dilemma? Here you are promoting principles of human rights and democracy and freedom and transparency and. But on the other hand, you went to bed with these dictators. You have been responsible, and then you keep telling us you are responsible, but you are responsible as well. Today, I hope the news is not right, I heard that now al-Baghdadi has reached Libya, he's in Sirte, and he's hiding in the underground dungeons that the Italians have built for Gaddafi. So, how we are going to really rebuild this trust between the North and the South, the East and the West, us in the region who are blaming ourselves all the time and keep putting the sticks on our shoulders? So it's a dilemma. It's indeed a dilemma. Of course, you gave us hope. We want to, congratulate you for where you are. But President Boris, how come that after 2 terms, with all what you have done, you have these all dictators or corrupt or nationalists or whatever back to power? Thank you.
Farida, let me have the question on the back and then we'll comment on both.
Yeah, I traveled a little bit in the Balkans in the 70s and 80s, and perhaps it was because of the naivete of a tourist or because of the communist regime suppression, but I did not sense any ethnic animosities at the time. And so the question is, in the West, we hear only about the animosities, ethnic, religious, in the Balkans since the fall of the communism. The question is, has that been accentuated or exaggerated or increased by perhaps the competition of the political parties in a cynical way to gain political advantage in a particular contest to whip up, if you will, ethnic, old, ancient, centuries-old ethnic and religious tensions for strategic advantage in an upcoming election? Was that something that occurred in any of your countries?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to invite their excellencies to comment. Please.
Chairman has been talking about the structure of education within Egyptian society. When we had a democratic revolution in October the 5th in 2000, structure of educational structure in Serbia was that one. 58.7% people, adults with an elementary school or without elementary school. 5.6% of people with university diploma. That was structure. Almost 60% only elementary school or without elementary school. 27.8% of people were functionally illiterate. Today, a few days ago, I was analyzing one opinion polls in which people are in favor of strong leadership, which means authoritarian leadership. This is how I'm answering my wonderful friend from Libya on your question. If you are in the reason why people were in favor of democracy in post-communist country wasn't democracy, first of all. That was better living standard. The second reason was democratic principles and values, because people living in the post-communist bloc, wasn't aware about democracy. They couldn't learn about advantage. That was very difficult to them. But they were watching TV somewhere, and they were aware that a living standard in Germany, in France, is much higher than in our countries. Specifically in former Yugoslavia, because we traveled abroad, and we saw that clearly. But the orientation of the people, educational structure, is one of the key elements. Specifically is a very important role of the TV, because only in support of TV with educational system can change dramatically that structure. To explain to ordinary people why democracy is connected with a better living standard. Without democracy, there is no better living standard in our countries. This is simple, this is crystal clear. No one is going to invest on the Balkans, in the Southeast Europe, without democracy, without security standards, without NATO standards in defense sector. Nobody is going to invest in our countries. And the only reason why we had an increasing of GDP for 6, 5, 7% after 2000 in all our countries was that we showed our orientation, democratic orientation to business people, investors from all around the world. When I was coming here, talking with your president Mubarak in that time, I had a list of 20 people, investors from Egypt, interested to invest in Serbia. But they were asking me where you are going, towards European Union or towards some other coalitions. What about your defense sector? And that is how I'm explaining to you reality. But people cannot easily understand how democracy is connected with a better living standard. This is a problem because I don't know who asked that. The nationalists are always using a national issue, religious issue in their manipulation on elections. This is easiest way to be to have to be a demagogue in politics. This is the easiest way. To be rational in politics, this is the really very difficult way, because demagogue is using emotions. Rational politicians are using explanation. Emotions are much stronger than explanation. Much stronger within structure of mentality of the human beings.
Austrian philosopher said, if Balkans don't exist, we must invent it. Why? Because for orgueil, Occident is an arrogance, maybe, it's important to have a region where transfer all is bad. And revenge, I cannot conclude without expressing my disappointment towards the lack of vision of some democratic leaders of today world regarding the proliferation of corruption, demagogy, populism, and is very dangerous because that can be used by the enemies of democracy to undermine it in the eyes of younger generation that can be attracted by the mirage of authoritarian personality. But not only in former communist country, but in what happened now in France, in Occident, is that this advanced, or not at us. We are vaccinated. But for other countries, and France is dangerous for the future of democracy.
Thank you. President Medani.
Well, regarding the fulfillment of criteria to be integrated into European Union, well, this was a great help for the evolution in our countries. And if you are in front of a transition, you have to think about this kind of strengthening the criteria through other organizations. And in our case, in Western Balkans, this process of European accession was quite important for the situation that we are today. And this is a good situation. We have had radical changes, of course, with also some negative aspects, as it is corruption, and also this kind of link between oligarchs and politicians. But on the other side, the system, it's working. And maybe you have heard that the Prime Minister of Croatia was put in prison, also the Prime Minister of Slovenia. President Kostadinescu told me that nearly, cabinet of ministers are in prison. So it means that the process... Prime Minister. So you see that the process...
We have a bit of similarity.
There are positive aspects, and not to see this Fatma with the negative feelings. And the other one is that regarding the ethnic problems or religion problems, well, in different countries we don't have these problems. Well, we have had this kind of conflicts after the split of one federation, which was in Balkans. It was the Yugoslav Federation. And we have seen also some other problems in other splits. So this kind of federations that we have had based on ideology, we have this federation been split, and in this kind of federation we have had this kind of conflicts. But in other countries, in Bulgaria, Romania, Albania, or also in Serbia itself, we didn't have this kind of ethnic, let's say, conflicts or religious conflicts. The conflict came from the split of one federation. It was only one example that was without this conflict was Czechoslovakia, when the split was in a normal and citizen way.
And the last word to His Excellency, President Peer.
Thank you very much. Only two sentences. In Bulgaria, we continue to have some people who criticize the pro-European orientation of my country. And I usually ask them, do you have children and grandchildren? Yeah, of course, Mr. President, we have. Where actually your children or grandchildren are studying or working? Mr. President, my children are studying in England, my children in Germany, in France. They have made already their choice. Please follow their choice, the choice of your children and grandchildren.
Thank you very much. Well, I think this has been a very rich session with great presidential contribution. Yet, we have not finished the work. There is a lot of work that need to be done. It's 15 to 7. I have more questions, but I will not put them to the floor. But the one that was remaining, and I cannot go without asking them, each one to be answered tomorrow or day after tomorrow, is, given your experience, is there a hope in the countries that you see in the Arab world? If you were elected president, can you fix what's happening? Yes or no? Yes or no? Go ahead.
That's the session for tomorrow morning. We have a session tomorrow morning for the Middle East.
Yes or no? Go ahead. Yes? Yes. Yes or no? You.
Hope. Yes, Emil.
no?
Come on, you have hope, Emil.
Yes.
I'm always optimist.
Yes.
It depends.
Diplomat.
So democratically, we have 3 yeses and 1 it depends. Thank you very much. And join me to thank our panelists. Thank you.